Good evening and welcome to the 12th Regulators and Policymakers Retreat being organized by the Independent Power Producers Association of India here at the Fort Aguada Beach Resort, Goa. I have the pleasure to introduce to you Mr. John Elliott, the India contributor of the Fortune magazine. Welcome to the retreat, John. John, we'd like to know, given your experience in journalism, as a financial journalist, as a business journalist, what does the world think of India's growth story of the last 10 to 15 years?
Well, as much as the world takes any notice of it, it's obviously impressed. But when you say the world, I mean, let's narrow that down to maybe Europe and America. The vast number of people in America won't have any view at all. More people will in Britain because of historic reasons which tie it and interest to the country. But if you're asking about those people who are specialised in these areas, the bankers, the politicians, the bureaucrats, and those sorts of people, then they have certainly been impressed by what's happened in the last 20 years. Some of them will say that they wish things had happened faster, because what is not well understood abroad, or not so well understood abroad, is the vastness of the Indian country in terms of size and population and views and democracy and the pushes and pulls of the various interests, some vested, some more respectable and all the rest. And that is not fully understood. There is an impatience with the country. That has been seen in what American diplomats are always and politicians are always saying when they come here, open up this and open up that. Of course, open it up for the benefit of the American economy rather than opening it up for the benefit of the Indian economy. But that aside, and the impatience aside, and the frustrations with some of the things that are going on at the moment, the British frustrations with Vodafone's tax problems and with the slow implementation of the Cairn Vedanta deal and the slow payment of debts on the Commonwealth Games, all these things are frustrations. But generally, people are obviously impressed by what's happened. But I think 20 years after liberalisation came in, and it is 20 years ago this month that Manmohan Singh as the finance minister announced the economic reforms, I think now, 20 years later, people would assume that things would be moving a bit more smoothly than they are. And there is amazement that the government lacks the leadership, and it does lack the leadership at the top to get things moving. So impressed, yes, with what's happened over the last 20 years. Frustration with the pace of change, some of it well informed and some of it, the frustration, not so well informed. But disappointment among those people who you would count as India's supporters, disappointment with current problems and lack of leadership from the government on developing the economy.
So we get a mixed picture here, right? So you have high centers of growth in certain areas, in certain sectors, whereas in other sectors you need a lot of time, effort, spent in getting approvals and clearances. Is that what we are saying?
Yes, and that comes on to a session which we've just had on the disparities of industrial development and on the current challenges. And what is quite obvious now is that the debate which has built up over the last 2 or 3 years over the use of land for industrial development means that no longer can people just come in and build something where they think it should go or where the local government thinks it should go. Mining, of course, is particularly sensitive, where it disrupts local communities, and industry as well, as we saw with the Tata factory in West Bengal, and with the special economic zones where companies were trying to take zones to do other things than what they were supposed to be doing in them. And it's quite clear that social attitudes in this country now have got to the point where they will have to be taken into account, and there'll have to be much more debate and much more taking care of the people who are disrupted. In a country where only 300, 350, 400 million people have benefited after 20 years, the other 700 million need to be looked after.
John, you mentioned land acquisition and you mentioned the Tata Nano project. If we go look at the specifics of the Tata Nano project and we compare it to, say, the Tata project that has been in existence in Jamshedpur for about more than a century now, or nearly a century, we see two different pictures. The Tata project in Jamshedpur has been there for such a long time, and they've integrated themselves so well into society over there and brought about benefits to the local population, reaching out to even the hinterland, not just the outlying areas, or the immediate areas over there. How do you see this play out? The same group, the same people, or at least coming from the same corporate group, were investing here in Bengal, and this did not play out so well. How come there is a dichotomy within the same industrial house for getting land acquisition?
Yeah, well, I don't know the history of Jamshedpur well enough to know what the reaction was when Tata first turned up and started to build the first part of its steel empire there. And anyway, as you say, 100 years ago, and probably there was no opposition anyway. The problem, and that does show a social consciousness and all the rest in that area. The problem in West Bengal was that, in my view, Tata, the company, chose the wrong site. It chose a site and I've been there, which had rich agricultural produce being done there. It was on either side of a highway, and it didn't look that impressive in terms of agriculture. It wasn't great vast plains of wheat or whatever, but it was serious development, agricultural development, which wasn't ripe for a disruption. And Tata could have gone elsewhere. And it was badly decided by the West Bengal government. There was the links between the West Bengal government and the company and the local society just didn't gel right. And then, of course, there was the West Bengal politics with the Trinamool only too happy to step in and stir the pot.
Right.
So it's local politics, and that is one of the things that foreign investors in this country have to be aware of, is that if you go to a place like West Bengal, and there's other states as well, you do have these problems of local politics interfering. But what we were just talking about in the session just now was how successful Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu are. But you were going to.
Precisely. Now, if we come to the state of Gujarat, we see that the state of Gujarat has been building an extensive land bank. Talking to people well in advance, taking the lands and hopefully giving them a better deal. So, when you cited the state of Gujarat as an example where industrial development has been possible and the land acquisition and all the, is much more certain, how does this compare well to say Bengal, which has had a century or 2 centuries of development since the times of British India? They were fairly economic literate. There was a large legacy of industrialization since that time. Yet Gujarat, being a trading outpost actually with little fertile land, and they were basically traders and no industrialists, they've come up so well. How do you trace this when you look at land acquisition?
Of course, there are families from Gujarat which have gone elsewhere and become big businesses. I mean, not Reliance is the obvious. The Ambanis is of the obvious example. West Bengal just declined with labour problems and all the rest, and it's a great debating society full of unrest and political motivations and all the rest. Whereas Gujarat, I think, is much more placid in terms of leaving aside the Hindu-Muslim problems of a few years ago, is a much more placid place politically, and it's had a strong government and a good bureaucracy. And it's had consistency of approach, continuity. What businessmen want when they invest somewhere is to go somewhere, think we're going to do this, and then be sure that for the next 5 years it's going to remain more or less the same while they build it and get it going. And that applies to Gujarat, and curiously, it also applies to Tamil Nadu, despite the problems that we've had with the parties that run the state in Gujarat, in Tamil Nadu. Those 2 states are examples of how, both on the coast, both with good ports and good infrastructure, and good examples of how a stable bureaucracy and politicians, whatever other problems there may be around, have maintained the stability of policy and of continuity, and have made companies feel if you come here and invest, you'll get delivery.